Caution, what you are about to see is considered off-meta, and is intended for entertainment purpose only. Do not attempt without parental supervision. Frosty Hobo 47 is not liable for any bullying that may occur when your team realizes you aren't running a meta loadout.
Today, I admit that I was wrong about the necrotic grips. At the time of making my original video, they were still very new. We didn't know about the interaction with Thorn, whether or not it was a bug or intentional. And at the time of making that video, everyone was still very low power level, so running high-level Nightfalls was out of the question. In fact, I had a lot of fun using them for this video, and I feel like I will use them more frequently after using them in this GM. This will be a part of a series of videos where I take an off-meta exotic armor piece and make a build centered around it as best as I can, and give my insights and thoughts about the build. Without further ado, I would like to present to you the Disgraced off-meta Grandmaster. For this GM, I figured I would put my figurative money where my figurative mouth was and use necrotic grip. Also, many other stars aligned. For example, this is a hive strike, so there are going to be hordes of enemies. Second, there is no grounded modifier, and since necrotic grip is procced off melees, I needed to have the celestial fire melee so I could use it without putting myself in too much danger. Then third, on top of both of those, we have unstoppable hand cannons this season, so I could bring Thorn along for the ride, so I could proc necrotic off of Thorn kills. The reason I didn't use the stasis melee is because if you saw from my previous video from the Glassway strike, stasis has some weird buggy nature with necrotic grip where half the time it doesn't proc, so that's kind of out of the question. So that's why I decided to go Celestial Fire, Thorn, Necrotic Grip, Unstoppable Hand Cannons. Thorn allows you to poke and take damage. It has a damage buff. Unstoppable Hand Cannons work on exotics. The dot means the damage fall off isn't as big of a factor. The dot synergizes with necrotic grips, making Thorn an AoE weapon. It is clear, Thorn is the best weapon in Destiny 2. So all jokes aside, this video is not just about Thorn, it's just Thorn is a very important part of this build because it allows you to proc the necrotic grip from range when you don't have your melee cooldown, and it would also allow you to not use Celestial Fire, but I was trying to get the most out of necrotic grip, so whenever I did have my melee up, I could use the necrotic grip passive on bosses and enemies. So that's why I chose to use Top Tree Dawnblade. I made sure to use Unstoppable Hand Cannons because then I can justify using Thorn and justify using other exotic hand cannons. When I was doing this, as I said, Shadebinder, for some reason, the melee on that has a weird functionality with necrotic grips, where it sometimes doesn't proc and sometimes it does. That was my main driving force behind choosing Top Tree Dawnblade, because I know I wanted a range melee, and I knew the electric melee was not that far. It wasn't like a true range melee, and then I know Shadebinder sometimes doesn't proc it, so then I wouldn't really be getting the effect of necrotic grips in Shadebinder. But if you're using Thorn, then you could probably bypass doing that if you wanted to do something similarly. But Top Tree Dawnblade worked out really well in this because there's a lot of solar shields, and there's a lot of moments where you don't want to get close, or you want to back up and throw your melee, and then it's always good to have the air dodge whenever something gets hairy, like when Curse Thralls approach. That happens a lot in the boss fight room. Another beneficial factor about this GM in particular is that the grounded modifier is not active. Typically it is on Grandmasters because they don't want you jumping. I really don't know why it's not on this one, but it's not. So that really lets me play into the Top Tree Dawnblade, being able to stay in the air. Something that's very interesting with Necrotic Grip is that you can apply it to a bunch of ads, and the way Top Tree Dawnblade passive works is you'll regenerate your ability cooldown as long as you're in the air. So if you see some thralls or shanks coming at you, throw your melee, jump in the air, stay in the air as long as you can. The Necrotic Grip burn should do enough damage to kill a couple of them, and it only takes a couple kills to get your abilities back. So it's a fast way of recharging your melee back, and it helps you reapply the Necrotic Grip and have a higher uptime percentage on it. Now obviously there's going to be some downsides to this build. So one of the biggest one is you're not using Well of Radiance. So if things get hairy, then you don't have a super to necessarily help you and your team. But that can kind of be countered with skill and knowledge of the strike. And also, there's 3 people. The chances that you're going to be the only warlock and your other warlock person, if there is another warlock, won't be running well is pretty unlikely. Most people run well because a lot of people don't really see a point to the other supers in difficult content, which is completely understandable. Most people just want to get the completion done. So that's the biggest one. Another one is, obviously you're using Thorn if you're doing the way I did it, where you use Thorn to proc the necrotic grip majority of the time. Now, Thorn is not a bad weapon by any means. It actually does some pretty good damage, especially if you get the damage buff. It's really easy to apply the dot, and it uses primary ammo. So a lot of the times you'll run into, with dot weapons like Anarchy or Witherhoard, they're not kinetic weapons, or primary weapons I should say. So Anarchy, you're relying on heavy ammo, and Witherhoard, you're relying on special ammo. Now, granted, there are ways of getting heavy and special with the Spoils of War from this season's Artifact mod, and Special Finisher, obviously, and Ammo Finder mods, but those are less so out of your control. Those are just passive benefits. So the benefit of Thorn is that you can consistently have that dot applied. It would take a little bit of math to do, but there's potential that through the course of a GM, something like Thorn could be used and potentially have more total damage throughout the entire duration of the GM. Because when you're using Anarchy or Witherhoard, you're probably using them on singular targets, like champions or bosses. So you're probably just saving that up until that point. Whereas something like Thorn, you can use it throughout the entire thing, and you're not going to really have to worry about ammo problems. Because, I mean, yes, you can run out of ammo, but primary ammo drops all the time. So that's typically not a concern. Some ways to think of those negatives is to, say, look at them in a positive way. For example, the fact that you're using Top True Dawnblade, and the fact that Top True Dawnblade does not do much damage, or doesn't really contribute that much to the team, means that you are perfectly fine being the person running Special Finisher, if that's how you want to do it. Because your super is less important than your other teammates' supers, most likely. Because you're not doing some massive amount of damage, you're not doing some huge buff to your allies. So you have the freedom to use up your super meter for special finishers and anything like that in the future. Something you can pair really well with Thorn and GMs is using Disruption Break. The fact that Thorn is a kinetic weapon means that you can synergize with the kinetic boost from Disruption Break. Where, if you're using something like Anarchy, sure, Anarchy does a lot of damage, but it's heavy ammo, and you're not going to be able to synergize with that. So this actually opens up that perk slot in your second weapon quite a bit. And knowing GMs, enemies have a lot higher health and take a lot less damage from you, so all boosted damage is pretty welcome, if you ask me. The next half of the video is going to be me rewatching the video and adding some commentary on top of it as I watch it, so it's going to be a little more freestyle. The previous part was scripted, so that's why there's sort of a change in tone at this midpoint. See, in Grandmasters, even if you're in a public space, enemies still do a ton of damage to you, so you got to be really careful. That's what I was doing in that little crossover section right there. So you can see the use of the banner shield. It lets us sit there and just tank some damage. And here's where necrotic grip and Thorn really come into play. It gets all those ads cleared fast. They can't even get to the banner shield. And I decided to use the super because I'm like, hey, whatever, you know, got the super full. Let me do some damage with it. It's not great damage, but it's better than primaries. I make sure to go apply the necrotic grip passive because the damage is actually pretty good as it ranks up. I make sure to proc disruption break on most of these shields right here with my sniper so I can go to using Thorn. Also take advantage of the fact that popping a shield actually does damage, so you can kind of play around with like letting them regenerate their shield to do this amount of damage. Because these wizards in the back here, they're really annoying. They just like let their shield break and then they go hide. They kind of play like players, I guess you could say. Here's the first unstoppable that I can easily stun with Thorn. There's a little hole you can look through. There's metal frames. I'm trying to get the enemies in the back there. There's a bunch of acolytes and knights with solar arc shields, so I'm trying to just deal with them. That boomer gets me from up there. Does some AoE damage to me constantly. That guy gets rezzed into death. Try to proc the necrotic grip. I think I get it on some people. So the necrotic grip can proc on people that have shields, so you want to make sure their shield breaks, so if the damage is actually going to their health. See right here, Thorn is really nice with necrotic grip because I can do damage to multiple targets at once. FYI to anyone that does Grandmaster content, if you notice my teammates in this fight, they sort of move around a lot while I'm staying in the back. If you're going to be in the front, please crouch, because a lot of the times you'll end up hitting people's heads. Now, there's this spot that I like to go. I'm explaining to them, like, hey, this is where I usually go. This works out pretty well. Because there's only one set of enemies that spawn in the door behind us right now. And we have a pretty good overhang on the boss. And an underhang when she moves to the second spot. You can move out of this area once she is in her final form. Final phase, I should say. But again, the AI is kind of annoying to deal with. They just kind of like sit behind cover and stuff. I mean, I guess it's better than them like super aggroing you. But Thorn actually sort of plays into this playstyle because, you know, they peek out, I get a hit or two. They go back in, they're still taking damage. So here are those enemies spawning from the door. They won't spawn there ever again, as far as I'm aware, unless there's some sort of variation when you do it. Just trying to prioritize those knights in the back, because they'll really screw you up with their AoE. Making use of field prep on my LMG for that reload boost. As long as you start crouched and start the animation, you get the animation speed for the entire duration. But on the flip side of that, if you start the reload when you're not crouched, you don't gain the reload speed when you do crouch. You gotta be careful here because there's a knight that'll spawn in that top right door from where I'm looking right now. See, he's booming. And sometimes you won't notice him. And now we're able to damage the boss from the bottom slightly, making use of Disruption Break on her shield. And applying necrotic on her. That's where necrotic and Thorn are really nice, because you can just sort of do these mechanics where the boss health is what determines the ad spawn. So if you're right at that health gate, you can throw necrotic or Thorn on him, and then the dot is going to take care of the rest. Again, making use of the good aerial ability with the subclass. You can sort of hang over that, get some shots in. You can see I keep rotating back towards here because there's mini ads that'll spawn throughout, so you're not quite sure at what points her health spawn them, but just being aware that they spawn will keep you safe as long as you keep rotating. And then the final overlook, or unstoppable, sorry, will be right here. Personally, I felt like this was kind of low for the unstoppables. I'm surprised that there was that singular regular ogre in that room. It just kind of felt weird compared to other Grandmasters. Like, usually Bungie goes, like, full crazy with Grandmasters. Especially with the wyverns, like they did in the Glassway. As long as we have people watching the few couple ad spawns, it's pretty easy to check where they're coming from. Another thing is the Thorn and Necrotic Grip burn stacks really well with the Void Detonators that Middle Tree Titan can do. Because you can proc the explosion from the dot. Which then leads to more AoE and more necrotic spreading. Just sort of whittling the boss down as you do. Retreating back to the safety to kill the ads from a pretty good spot. This little drop down area, it's pretty safe as well. On this last encounter, the boss can sometimes rotate right behind this little console, so you have to be careful to watch out for that. It's only during the final encounter. So now we're able to sort of rotate towards the other side of the room, because all the ads start spawning from the portal back there. Right there, I was able to make use of the Icarus Dash. I wasn't aware of the Curse Thrall until the last second. Now I can grab the Thorn buff and start throwing it on the boss. As you can see, it's doing quite good damage from a primary. And that's the thing, is like, I'm not saying it's like doing incredible damage like Anarchy or something. I'm saying for a primary, it's doing pretty good damage. Where I can use my heavy and my special weapon for more utility roles. Like popping shields, applying that debuff. I believe right here, yes. So I die. We're past the 30-minute mark. So my teammates end up killing her. And as you'll see in a little bit, we get a platinum clear. And some cool loot from the GM. Now, it wasn't my fastest clear, but it wasn't my slowest clear either, so I think that's a good way of pointing out that, like, you don't have to use meta builds to get GMs done. It's more about, like, knowing the spawns of enemies and stuff. So if you enjoyed this video, I hope you have a good day. Thumbs up is appreciated. Subscribing is always helpful. You know, the YouTube stuff, y'all know what to do.